we want to talk about is examine, repair, replace. Some companies have a procedure set where when they receive everything back from a conference, they go through it and make sure nothing is damaged and replace things and replenish as needed. But some are so busy sending the same shipments back and forth to conferences that they may not have time to really evaluate and fix things. So take this time to unpack all of your various exhibit items, set everything up, and make repairs as needed. You know, something might need to be steamed, or a little bit of stain remover on a pen mark or something like that. Or those acrylic literature racks always get destroyed, so you may need to reorder some of those. If something needs to be replaced or updated, now is the time to do that. And then take a look at your literature and see, do you need to reprint some things? Are some kind of getting battered around? Or do you need to update things totally, like your order forms and your collateral and trifolds and that kind of stuff? So now take that time to really examine everything, and does it still fit with what you're trying to get across with your products and services? Does the design of it still fit with your goals? Our second little tip here is to consider what you're shipping. You may have in the past just shipped everything because you want to make sure that you don't leave anything out, and that is wonderful because it covers all bases, but at the same time your booth can come across looking cluttered. And we all know what it's like when we're walking through an exhibit hall and we're so distracted by everything going on in the booth that we can't even figure out what the company is or what they do. So just take a look at everything and see what may be able to be left behind next time. You might consider highlighting a particular product or service and maybe test it out at a couple different conferences. And if you still want that safety net of bringing all of your materials and your products with you, then that's fine. But only bring one or two of each one, and then store it down below or out of sight so that it's there if you need it, but it's not taking up visual space on your booth and being distracting.
This could also help some of your shipping expenses. So instead of shipping everything for every single show, you can cut down some costs on boxes that you may need and just the big shipping cases that you might need, because you're not going to ship every single thing that you have. I used to work for an orthotic lab, and as most of you know, there are usually, each lab has a lot of different types and styles of orthotics, and they all generally look the same. I know when you get into the nitty-gritty of them, they're very, very different, but they all generally look the same. And pretty much every lab that I see out there always puts out every single product that they have, and it just immediately becomes very cluttered looking. So I totally get wanting to ensure that people know that you haven't forgotten something, or that it's just not part of your repertoire anymore, but it doesn't necessarily need to be on the table. And then maybe when somebody asks for something specific or comes up in conversation, like Ann said, you do have it underneath the table when it's appropriate. So I think one of the best things that you can do when it comes to a trade show display is almost be a minimalist, because you're going to want to focus on the conversation, the quality of the conversation. And when you've got everything just kind of strewn all over your tabletop, it can deter from that, and it can deter from somebody asking the question that you want them to ask. One thing that Ann and I really like to take advantage of is the look of your team. So Ann and I, when we exhibit at a trade show, it's just the two of us, so our team is relatively small and controlled. I don't know if we're controlled, but our rules of trade show engagement are controlled in terms of the way that we present ourselves. And what I mean by that is, what are you wearing? What is the vibe that you're putting out to the DPMs that you are targeting? How are they going to feel when they approach your booth? So I've seen a lot of booths where everyone looks the brand, and that's really important. So if your brand colors for your logo and your corporate ID. Let's say they're a Kelly green and gray, then it's probably not a bad idea for your team to wear those colors, because you're just exemplifying your brand, you're representing your brand, and it almost looks like you fit in that space when you're standing at your trade show booth. One of the best examples I can think of, and I don't want to call the company out by name because I don't know if they'd be okay with that, but you would probably recognize them as I speak about it. They're always very polished, and they always wear red accents. So whether it's a red scarf, like the ladies will wear a red scarf, they always look uniform. And one of the funniest things that I think has come up, that sometimes that they're like, well, they kind of look like flight attendants, which is not a bad thing. You know, flight attendants, they are their brand. That's who they're representing. The point is, people were talking about it. The people are talking about the fact that they look so uniform and they look like part of a very branded group. And if people are talking about it, that's ideal, because I have a lot of clients who come to me and say, how do we get more people at our booth? And you don't want to be gimmicky. Like, no one wants to do a gimmick. No one wants to be like, well, I don't want to put out a bunch of freebies because people are just going to come by and grab those and that's all they're going to do, and then they're out. But one of the really strong things you can do is create a buzz. And if you can create a buzz by the way that your team looks, that's really powerful. So, and then the other thing that you want to consider is consistency. How do you want to represent your brand? If wearing scrubs at the booth fits your brand, perfect. If wearing workout clothes at the booth fits your brand, perfect. So while some people might say like, well, workout clothes, that's not professional, you're not wearing a suit and tie. You don't necessarily have to. You can wear whatever works for your brand and the personality that you want to exude from your brand. So, and clothing, whether we like it or not, is a big part of that personality. So make sure that however you choose to put your team in a quote, for lack of a better word, kind of a costume for the trade show, make sure that it matches up with the brand that you want to portray.
For us, I really like the idea of we have 4 main colors in our logo, so we always try to stick to wearing those colors in the booth just so we look coordinated with our booth. And we also try to stay on the same level of attire, so it's not yoga pants and it's not like a 3-piece Hillary Clinton suit. It is, casual, business casual. So those are all different things that you can consider. Some companies like to provide polo shirts or embroidered button-down shirts, with a sport coat, whatever works for you guys. But now is a really good time to take advantage of the downtime and evaluate what you want your look to be, and then order maybe some pieces that you might need to provide for your team, like shirts or a cardigan or something like that.
Next, this is one of the, I would say, biggest goals of any show, and something that not just of show, but any sales process, is that you're going to need to consider how you measure success. So I've worked with a lot of companies that really don't have, or previously didn't have, a plan for how to measure success of a trade show. And it's always kind of shocking to me, because you spend so much money. Trade show booths are a good chunk of change. You've got food and travel expenses in the hotel. So these are expenses that you don't want to just choose willy-nilly. You need to make sure that you're achieving an ROI. But then you can also get hung up on the wrong ROI. And what I mean by that is not every company is going to measure their success the same way for a trade show. For example, I used to work for an orthotic lab, a custom orthotic lab. Now, if I was selling over-the-counter orthotics, I can more easily do an actual transaction at the show. I can sell a DPM, a pair of orthotics, take the cash, take the credit card right then and there, and I can measure my success that way. So the goal going would say I would want to sell 50 pairs of orthotics a day on the trade show floor. Okay, that's a good goal. But at least, and I've gone in and I have that goal set. So first of all, make sure you're setting goals every day for your team. And if you haven't set goals, use this time to create what those would be realistically. But going back to my orthotics example, I worked for a custom orthotic lab. And as we know, you can't just sell a custom orthotic. There has to be a patient that you've either casted or scanned, and then they send the order in. So on the trade show floor, those orders aren't going to happen. So how do you measure success? Well, then you can measure it by the amount of quality leads you got. Or you can say, well, I was really hoping to walk away from this trade show with more email addresses to improve my email marketing campaign. So it's just really important that you go in with preconceived notions and you've set the goals ahead of time. And I would even say set daily goals. Like I said, it could be that you want to make X amount of dollars for a trade show if you're able to do those transactions, but are they going to be the same for every day? Because the last day might be much slower than the first and second day. So if you say I want to sell 50 pairs of over-the-counter orthotics on Thursday and Friday, and then maybe be okay with 25 pairs on Saturday, fantastic. But you've just got to take the time to set those goals and consider how you're measuring success, because it is completely different based on your business model.
And also you want to make sure that you measure these metrics that you're setting for yourself year after year to see if that conference is working for the goals of your company. And don't just take 1 year's performance, because every conference can have a bad year for sure, depending on lots of different factors. So evaluate over a period of years to see, is this conference working for us or is it not? What is not working about it? And then you might also want to track nitty-gritty things like closing percentage. So you might have a dollar amount that you need to sell $34,000 at the conference and then break that down into a daily goal. But then you might also want to have a closing percentage. So you would track that by making tally marks every time a doctor comes to your booth. If they actually come into your booth, you're engaging with them, make a little tally mark of that, and then you can compare that to your total number of orders to find out what your closing percentage is. This will also give you a good idea of how much engagement is inside the exhibit hall. Because if the conference is telling you that there's 1,200 people there, but you've only noted that you saw 8 people, then obviously you can see there's some kind of a disconnect. And what is leading to that disconnect? Is it that the exhibit hall was slow in general? Or does your booth need to be evaluated? Is it not clear what your purpose is? Were your salespeople off gallivanting? What is happening that's contributing to that? So
obviously with every trade show, you're going to, I shouldn't say obviously, I say hopefully you're going to get a good amount of leads from every trade show you attend. And there are, again, a lot of teams that I've seen that really don't have a strong follow-up process for these leads. And so it's important to take the time now to figure out what that process should be. I would say for me in the past, one of the best things that I always did was I would take my notes immediately, and we're going to talk about that next actually, so I don't want to focus too much on it, but it's a really, really important part of lead follow-up. So really, which I would say the biggest thing you need to do is set a goal for when your follow-up is going to be. So for example, in the past when I would be selling at a trade show booth, I would maybe meet somebody on Thursday and they would want some statistics on how a marketing program would work. And I definitely want to walk away with a new account before they leave. So when that trade show floor closes, I immediately go to my computer and I email that lead right away at the show. I'm not going to wait until Monday when I get back in the office. I'm going to do it at the show, even though I'm exhausted, even though I'm hungry. I've got to maximize the time, and I've got to maximize how well I can convert this lead into a sale. So I go to my computer, I email that lead right away with the information that they've requested so that either Friday or Saturday, I can walk away with a new account. I don't have to wait until next week. So that might not be the exact answer for you, but my point is set your process. What are the rules of engagement for you and your team members when you are following up with your leads? Or maybe you need to give them a little bit of breathing space. Maybe you can tell from based on the conversation that they need a little bit of time to think, or they're making major changes within their practice and you hounding them to become their new partner is going to be something that might actually deter their decision. So make that a part of your process. And really this all comes down to, and I just kind of want to get into it right away if you're okay with it, Nan. I just want to get into the lead notes process, because all of that information is going to be in your notes and how you engage with that lead after the show.
One thing I want to add to this lead follow-up process is we know from being in sales, it's a common statistic that it takes 8 touches for a person that's on the fence to actually commit to something new. So make sure that when you're planning out your lead follow-up, that you're planning that far out. And you might not want to touch them every single day. That might be too much, but the first 2 might occur in the first 2 weeks, and then the next 4 are over the next 3 months. But plan that out and put it into your CRM system or whatever you're using to track your leads, that pops up little reminders to tell you to call their office or send them a sample or a new catalog, and just keep them in your sphere. We notice that we reach out to people by email, usually the first time, and then, maybe then a phone call, and then they get an email like this with a video. And so they're getting different pieces of content from us in different ways, different types of media. And so it's just establishing us as people that know what we're talking about. And so establish yourself as someone that knows what they're talking about, so they know when they are ready for that product that they go back to you. And if you notice in 60 days that person hasn't returned a phone call or hasn't followed up with you, do not write them off. You should never write a lead off. Just keep them going, keep them on your email list until they tell you. I know we've talked about this before, and it used to be written on my sales board at my old company, and it was buy or die. Unless they tell you that they don't want to hear from you anymore, keep talking to them, keep providing them valuable information that they can use.
Yep, I really like, and I've had this with different companies that I've worked for, CRM, a customer relationship management program. If you don't have a CRM, I would definitely look into purchasing some sort of software. I've used spreadsheets before, but I'm just me, and I'm not managing a whole sales team at the moment. So I don't really need anything other than a spreadsheet for my personal goals. But if I was managing a team, a CRM system is something that is really, really important, and they're not all super expensive. So you can find some that will meet the goals of your follow-up process for free. Or maybe just, $5 a month, or, they definitely range. There are ones that are much more expensive per month. But again, that's just going to depend on what your goals are. And if you don't take the time, when you've got the time, like right now, to figure out what those goals are with your follow-up process and how much money you could spend on a program like that, then you're just never going to know. You'll probably just continue to sit stagnant. So again, I just don't want to beat a dead horse, but it's important to use these weeks when you're not rushing from airport and hotel back to the airport to take the time and figure these things out. So this follows up with what I wanted to discuss as well, which is your notes process. I remember when I was really heavy into sales, I was obsessive about the quality of my notes. And I remember how much it helped me with closing sales in the future, way more than the rest of my team. So often, if I had other team members on the trade show floor with me, they would write down Dr. So-and-so interested in product X. And that was it. And okay, that's great. You know what kind of, when we're done, when you're going to follow up, you know what kind of, maybe a sample to send them or more literature on that particular product. That's all fantastic. But what else was in the conversation? What are they struggling with right now? What are their concerns right now? What's going on with their team? I would write down all of that because it all contributes to the relationship that you're going to build. And it also contributes on maybe whatever other problems they've got, I might have another solution for them in a different bag of tricks. So the more detail you can put into your notes, definitely do it. Even though it's going to take a little bit more time to type it all up, it's definitely going to be worth it in the long run, because I can't tell you how many times I had a conversation later in my follow-up process, and the physician was so impressed about a tiny detail that I remembered from our conversation. And here she said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you remember me saying that." Of course I do. And it's not that I didn't care about it. It wasn't just an act. I wasn't just like, oh, well, I'm just doing these tricky things to manipulate my sales process. That's not true. I really do care about all of my clients. And I think you showcase that when you pay attention to the details. So I think the biggest thing in terms of my advice for notes is just write down as much information as you can. And then as soon as you are done talking to that individual, and if you don't have a rush of people at the booth, open up your laptop and put it into a spreadsheet or put it into your CRM right away, because details quickly go out of your brain. You will quickly forget. And so it's really, really important to get those in your saved file sooner than later, so that you can maximize all the detail that you wrote down or that you had within that conversation.
And one of the things you might want to write down is, what is that doctor's preferred method of communication? Because we know from calling on offices that you might call the main number and they've got one heck of a guard dog on their phone line that doesn't let anyone through, but you actually want to talk to me. Like, that doctor actually wants to talk to me, but they don't know I'm calling because, the receptionist is really good at her job. And so make sure you ask the doctor, what's your preferred method of communication? Do you want me to email you? Do you want me to call the office and leave messages? Do you want me to text you? What would you prefer? And I always recommend, if you're not going to be electronic and use your laptop and stuff like that right there, keep a legal pad or a clipboard handy so you can just kind of jot it down. And there's some kind of perception about taking notes on paper when you're talking to someone is okay, but if you're taking notes on your phone while you're talking to someone, it comes off as that you're disengaged. So consider that as well. And then one little note on this is about those scanning, lead retrieval systems. So a lot of conferences, larger conferences, will have lead retrieval systems, which are amazing. And they really do save a lot of time. But a lot of people will make the mistake of scanning a badge and thinking, okay, I've got that lead's information. But just because you have their name, that doesn't tell you anything about them. So if you're not going to write it down right when you're talking to them, make sure that as soon as they walk away, you're logging into that lead retrieval app and making a note on that person so that you have that information there. Otherwise, those lead retrieval systems are not cheap to rent, and you want to make sure that you're taking full advantage of it. So make the effort to get all the information, record it right then while it's still fresh in your mind, for sure.
The last thing I want to say about the lead retrieval process is, again, because we're talking about planning for all of this, is actually create a lead retrieval form. You can always add as many notes as you want to, but make sure that you put, okay, what is this person's name? What is their email address? I would say their email address is more important than their phone number. You can Google their phone number. That's not going to be a problem. So you have to get their email address. And then, depending on if you've got a list of services, you can say, okay, well, they're interested in this service. And that way you can just check a box instead of saying they're interested in, service XYZ. Maybe your service or product has a really long name. You don't want to spend time writing that whole product name down. So just create check boxes for yourself. So have an actual form that you can keep on your clipboard and write that specific information down. And then it can be tricky. Like I said, I think the most important information in terms of follow-up is that email address, and it can be difficult to get that from some physicians. So we talked about this in our email marketing tricks of the trade, and it is relevant in this trick of the trade as well. This conversation is give them something that offer something that they will want to give you their email address for. So when I used to sell a subscription service to patient education videos, I often didn't have a lot of the videos playing at my booth. I had maybe 1 or 2 videos, and then they're like, well, I really want to see the video on heel pain. Okay, no problem. Let me email that for you. And so if they need some specific information, the only way you can get it to them is if you email it to them. So if it's something that they're really interested in, that's not going to be a problem. So always have your, what's the word I'm looking for, Ann? Clickbait, not clickbait.
Lead magnet?
Lead magnet. Always have your lead magnet, which was applicable to our email marketing conversation, but have that lead magnet at the trade show booth, something that you know they will trade their email address for in exchange.